Enforcing border security during the pandemic.
We are processing them at the border and returning them to Mexico within 2 hours. It's been a game changer.
The crisis creates additional challenges for asylum seekers.
The option to seek asylum in the U.S. is being cut off.
Plus, understanding the two major propositions on the ballot and what the data suggests about the risk of COVID outbreaks in schools.
So we have not seen an increased number of outbreaks in the schools.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. We begin on the issue of immigration and the pandemic's impact on both illegal crossings and those seeking asylum. This week, leaders from Customs and Border Protection briefed the media on a sharp drop in apprehensions over the last year, as well as the effects of a policy that allows the Border Patrol to expel immigrants from the country at a rapid pace. At a news conference at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base,
The administration message is clear. Illegal immigrants will no longer be released into the country. They will no longer
Customs and Border Protection Acting Commissioner Mark Morgan said during the agency's 2020 fiscal year that ended in September, Border Patrol agents encountered 53% fewer people attempting to cross illegally than the previous year, when record numbers of families arrived mostly from Central America. The biggest dip came in April, when agents apprehended about 16,000 people at the U.S.-Mexico border. The previous month, days after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, President Trump enacted Title 42, a public health directive he said would curb the potential spread of the disease from immigrants by giving the Border Patrol the ability to circumvent normal processing and return them to Mexico within hours of their arrest. Along the southwest border, the agency has carried out nearly 200,000 Title 42 expulsions. Critics accuse the Trump administration of using the pandemic as a red herring to deny immigrants due process, but the policy has the full support of Acting Commissioner Morgan.
It was CDC's public health order that actually directed us to do what we're doing under Title 42, because they said the further introduction of these individuals that illegally enter the United States further increases the risk of the spread of COVID. And so under Title 42, about 90% of those we're encountering, we are processing them at the border and returning them to Mexico within 2 hours. It's been a game changer, and in my opinion, has saved countless American lives.
Can individuals apply for asylum given that Title 42 remains in place?
So there's a key point to that. So right now, we are still meeting our refoulement obligations with respect to that. And I'll give you an example. So if a child comes across under TVPRA and we believe that that child is in fact being trafficked, they will not be amenable to Title 42. We will pull them out of that. But if they come here under the regular credible fear process, again, based on public health, no, we're going to return them right away and remove them.
Because the average time is roughly 2 hours when someone enters the country unauthorized and then they meet with an agent and they're sent back. Who makes that determination on whether or not their asylum claim is credible?
It's going to be a combination of things, right? So the agent on the ground is going to make that in conjunction with appropriate supervisory staff that's going to make that decision. But keep in mind, what we're talking about is a global pandemic.
Overall declines in apprehensions have not hampered human smugglers. In the last fiscal year, CBP intercepted more than 270 tractor-trailers attempting to smuggle nearly 4,600 people, an annual increase of 36%. A lot of individuals, criticize the agency, saying they're just going right back into the system of the illicit trade on the south side of the border.
Now I understand. What I would say is their criticism is misplaced. Who they should be criticism is the disgusting cartels that are using the immigrants to align their pockets with money and just increase their power. I'll say one other thing quick that I've shifted on this. Before, I always went after the cartels and blamed them 100%. COVID, that's changed. I'm also blaming the illegal migrants themselves. They are knowingly and willingly allowing themselves to be placed in those stash houses, to be placed in those tractor trailers. And when they do that, they're exposing everybody that they come in contact with COVID-19. That's unacceptable and should stop.
Have there been actual data points that you could offer that indicate people who come across the border illegally have COVID?
Yes, so keep in mind, 90% of the individuals we're returning back to Mexico immediately, but we still have had a couple hundred people that have tested positive for COVID.
Flanked by leaders of CBP, Morgan told the press of the 60,000 agency personnel across the country, 2,300 had been infected with COVID and 13 died after contracting the virus. What percentage of those contracted the disease while in the capacity of their work?
So it's hard to do. We do the same kind of contact tracing that is outlined by the CDC. It's not always 100% to be able to define that, but we do our best. But remember, we've got about 43,000 badge-wearing gun toters in this agency. They can't telework it in. They've got to get up every morning, kiss their families goodbye, and they got to get out on the front lines and protect this country.
While the pandemic led to widespread closures and an economic slowdown, it did not get in the way of construction on a new wall system. Opponents, meanwhile, continue to challenge the project in court. Recently, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the administration could not pay for it with funds diverted from the military. Any plans to stop wall construction here in the state of Arizona?
No. So that lawsuit is just one of countless lawsuits in our line. So right now we have a stay, so we haven't stopped building one single mile. We actually are building more miles per day, more miles per week than we did pre-COVID.
Where's the funding going to come from?
So it's good. Right now, it's still coming from a variety of sources. So both DHS appropriations and DOD funding. So the lawsuit you're referring to, right now we have a stay. So that has not stopped our construction efforts at all.
Outside of the courts and on the ground at construction sites. Demonstrations led by indigenous groups over building on ancestral land have led to clashes with law enforcement. This week, the Arizona Department of Public Safety fired tear gas into a crowd blocking a Border Patrol checkpoint. A move condemned by Tohono O'odham Nation Chairman Ned Norris Jr., who also accuses the Trump administration of ignoring the nation's calls to halt construction and shutting it out of discussions. Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott refutes that claim and says the agency has a tribal liaison group that meets frequently with tribal leadership.
If you don't agree at the end of the day, that's just how things are going to go. But to say that we haven't had conversations, that we haven't worked together, I think is a little disingenuous.
Other concerns include the effects groundwater pumping could have on sensitive ecosystems, like the San Bernardino Wildlife Refuge in Cochise County and the Quito Baquito Springs in the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument.
And we're monitoring that on a daily basis to make sure that even that 5-mile cushion, if you will, or buffer zone, isn't negatively impacting it.
The CBP commissioner says many of the problems along the border could be fixed by congressional leaders.
As the economic conditions are worsening in Mexico and the entire Western Hemisphere due to COVID, get ready. We have to have the tools, like the wall, like technology, to be able to protect our home.
On the other side of the border, the Keno Border Initiative sees firsthand the effects of U.S. immigration policies. In Nogales, Sonora, the nonprofit provides humanitarian aid to migrants and deportees. We learned how it has adapted its services during the pandemic from Interim Director of Education and Advocacy, Tracy Horan, who also shared what she's hearing from asylum seekers.
One of the biggest challenges we've seen is the repercussions of the border closure to migrants. So, since March, so we're now months out. And when the border closed to asylum seekers, there were some people who had already been waiting months. So I know a family that they were just 5 families away from actually being processed when the border closed. And so then they just added another 6 months onto their wait. And so having people that have been here in Nogales waiting for protection in the U.S., many of them now closing in on a year. I've had a number of migrants comment to me in the past couple of weeks that they're celebrating a year of living in Nogales, and they never thought when they arrived at the border that they would be waiting that long.
It's warm, hospitable.
In February, Arizona 360 toured Keno Border Initiative's new shelter just ahead of its grand opening. It offers nearly 50 times the space as its old facility and includes dozens of beds. But Horan says the pandemic has prevented Keno Border Initiative from sheltering anyone overnight. She added that workers still offer other services like meals to go and legal aid, but that all happens outdoors now. What sort of strain does this place on organizations like the Keno Border Initiative, where for so many years you've had a system that is not perfect, but it certainly supports people who are in need?
Yeah, so really this ministry was designed focusing on deportees and more recently asylum seekers, people in transit. So really humanitarian assistance that's designed to be short term. But now we're trying to figure out how can we support people to find work? How can we support people's mental and emotional needs when they're dealing with so much loss and so much uncertainty for an extended period of time? and especially for children. So I talked with a woman this morning from Venezuela who said, my children have lost 2 years of school now, and I don't know what to do. It's so hard on them, and they really want to learn, but I can't put them in school here because they're requiring documentation from Venezuela, and the schools in Venezuela are closed. I have no way of getting that documentation. So all of the issues just become more complex and more difficult the longer people are stranded.
Is it forcing people to do things like cross unauthorized or go into the hands or the system of a smuggler?
Yes, so we've seen a number of people, and actually just this morning, a number of families from Guatemala showed up with very young children who had tried to cross through the desert, because more and more people are seeing that the option to seek asylum in the U.S. is being cut off. More and more there are obstacles put in. We're not seeing people, even people in vulnerable situations that, according to the original CDC order, should have a process to be able to go into the U.S. Those exceptions are not being honored. So including a family from Cuba, a pregnant woman with a high-risk pregnancy, they had tried at a port of entry and asked and presented all of the information about the danger they were fleeing and her medical situation, and were refused. And so they made the difficult choice to cross through the desert. And that was the only way that they could be taken into custody to begin their asylum process. And it's possible if they had not done that, that the baby might not have survived. So you do see people making those difficult decisions because more and more the reality is there aren't other options available that should be to honor their rights to seek asylum.
How much longer is something like the unprecedented situation you're witnessing, how much longer is it sustainable for?
That's hard to say. I think one thing that has been a blessing is many people recognize what folks are suffering here and have responded, individuals that contact us about sending donations. I think the hardest thing for us is not being able to have the pool of volunteers we counted on before. We had 200 people that would come regularly, whether it's monthly or weekly, to bring food or help serve the food or prep the food or sort donations. And so that has been really challenging as staff having to step in and take on a lot of that work.
Have you had immigrants who typically come to places like KBI who have contracted the virus?
We have. It's hard to say because it's really hard to access tests here in Mexico. It's very expensive. It costs about the equivalent of $150 if you don't have access to Mexican Social Security. But we have a number of families. There's one gentleman that I know who came every single day until a few weeks ago when his wife showed up and said that he was in the hospital. So, we've been praying for him, but he's been on oxygen, and it's really challenging because people, if they're in a different environment, if their bodies are already kind of worn or they're undernourished, then they're even more susceptible to something like that. So that is something that we've seen. And for the most part, it seems the migrants, have the good sense to stay home, and they might send someone else to get their food if they're not feeling well. But it is concerning, especially for folks who might not have access to medical care.
Tracy Horan, Associate Director of Education Advocacy for the Keno Border Initiative. Thank you for your insight.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Along with the races for the White House and Senate, down the ballot, Arizonans have two propositions to consider. Prop 207, which would legalize recreational marijuana for adults 21 and older, and Prop 208, which would tax the wealthy to raise funding for public education. Tony Paniagua looked into both and heard from supporters and opponents for each measure.
Marijuana is legal for medical reasons in Arizona and more than 24 other states, but currently only 11 states allow its possession and use for recreational purposes. They include the neighboring states of California, Colorado, and Nevada. Arizona could join them if voters approve Prop 207, the marijuana legalization initiative. Lisa James is against it.
Prop 207 is 17 pages of sweeping changes to Arizona law that will be virtually impossible to change for the foreseeable future. and the devil's in the details on here. So even for those people who might support recreational adult use or decriminalization, Prop 207 is not the way to do that.
We reached the spokesperson in favor of the proposition by Zoom audio.
What we're seeing across the state is folks realize that the option is, do you want to sell marijuana in a store where someone is checking an ID, or do you want it to continue to be sold on a street corner? And our opponents seem to think that there's an option 3 where the product goes away forever and it disappears. That's not an option.
Among other policies described in the proposal, Prop 207 makes it legal for adults 21 and older to grow no more than 6 plants at home. It would place a 16% tax on marijuana sales to be divided among college districts, law enforcement agencies, and other groups. And it would also permit local governments to ban marijuana and control aspects such as zoning and licensing. Smart and Safe Arizona supports Prop 207. As of July 2020, the group had raised about $3.5 million, mostly from 3 marijuana corporations. Recreational supporters were not successful with another proposition in 2016, but this time they are more confident.
My husband's a cop and thinks that it's a waste of his time to be looking at marijuana offenses and to arrest, convict, incarcerate folks for something that is legal in 3 of our neighboring states.
Arizonans for Health and Public Safety is against Prop 207. It has collected less than $150,000, a fraction of the pro-207 side.
My brother started using marijuana in high school, and he has spent most of his adult life in and out of jail, prison, and rehab. I realize that that is not the case for every marijuana user, but what I can tell you is that that's marijuana from back in the 80s. This is the marijuana today, and it's impacted our family. Everybody, you hear a lot of arguments of, oh, let me do what I want with my body, or it only affects me, but it doesn't. It's affected our entire family.
Another proposition just as divisive deals with education. Proposition 208 is known as the Teacher Salaries and Schools Initiative. It would impose a new 3.5% tax surcharge on incomes exceeding $250,000 for individuals, or $500,000 for a couple filing jointly. The funds raised would be used to hire and pay teachers and support staff and help with mentoring and training. This 2020 proposition comes on the heels of 2018's Red for Ed movement, which led to rallies and more funding for teachers.
And they were going to give us a 20% raise. And it turned out it really wasn't a 20% raise. It was a raise on the amount of money that they were paying us back then, and they refused to give any of that money to our ed support professionals who were standing right there next to us.
Those against it include Governor Doug Ducey and the Southern Arizona Leadership Council.
If you take a look at Proposition 208, it will increase the funding, and there's a lot of questions about the amount of funding that will actually make it to the school districts, but it targets purely salary structure and really does not hit or impact the kids and the students. And it is solely focused on K-12 and not the entire education pipeline.
According to Ballotpedia, Invest in Education has received nearly $600,000, similar to what its opponents have raised. Both sides say voters should take a close look at the stakes here.
People say that, oh, well, you didn't go into it to become rich. Well, no, I didn't, but I didn't go into it to go into poverty either.
We believe we need a comprehensive solution that will be sustainable on the funding source, and that's where our concern with this funding measure is.
207 and 208 are statewide propositions, but residents throughout Arizona may see additional local ballot measures.
As more schools welcome students back into the classroom, the threat of COVID-19 still looms. We discussed current trends with County Health Department Director Dr. Teresa Cullen.
Well, we follow a lot of different metrics. The one that we've been following closely and we talk a lot about are the cases per 100,000. And ideally, minimum transmission, which would be 10 cases per 100,000, 110 cases a week. We're not there yet. We're around 300 to 400 cases per week. Ideally, that is where we'd like to be as we go into flu season. It would give us really a safety net if we had to go up a lot. As you know, we just recently came out of another blip where we were up to over 1,000 cases a week. So our hope is that we'll be able to sustain where we are now and still see a dip down. There is some concern at the state level that we're starting to see a minimal increase. All of us are hoping that that will stabilize.
How much does the U of A's presence and their testing numbers complicate things here in a county of this size?
You know, I think 2 months ago we weren't clear what the impact would be. I think now, as we've come out of this spike that we truly believe was due to the university, we've learned a lot. We're working closely with them. The impact right now is very minimal. The 15 to 24-year-old age group has seen a decrease, a very significant decrease, whereas we have the older age group, 24 and above, seeing an ongoing increase there.
Some school districts are bringing students back in for in-person learning. There was one district here in the Tucson area who did so this year, or this month rather, but we're going to see more. What will you be looking for?
So what we look for is ongoing cases, and we are working very closely with the school districts. They've been actually excellent partners. We do a few webinars a week with them. We've asked them as soon as they get one case to let us know. The state requirement is with 2 cases, they have to let us know. They've almost always been cooperating with us. So as soon as we get a case, we do a case investigation. We do contact tracing. You know, we have a contact tracing team that's designed specifically for schools. So we've had a lot of luck. We haven't seen a lot of transmission from cases to the contacts. So we follow the contacts. That's the one thing we would be very concerned with. If we start seeing an increased number of contacts of cases become cases themselves, that means that we have been very unsuccessful in terms of helping stop transmission.
The schools that have reopened, what's the risk level thus far based on what you've seen in these last few months?
We've had over 100 cases reported from the schools that have been open, but they've been limited to one person. So we have not seen an increased number of outbreaks in the schools.
So if a child comes down with those symptoms, do they go to their primary care or should they be tested right away?
You know, the recommendations are a little unclear. What we are recommending is that you stay at home for at least 24 hours. If you clear within 24 hours, you're fine. Then the CDC recommendation is you can go back to school. I think the one thing I would encourage parents, though, and families is we have testing that is ubiquitous. It is really easy to get tested right now. So if you have the ability, meaning you can get to a testing site, especially a county testing site where there's no fee involved, we would encourage you to test. The more we test, the more we'll have insight into what's going on in the community.
Okay, Dr. Teresa Cullen from Pima County Health Department, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting us to your show.
For more insight into how COVID-19 affects children, we turn to Dr. Chan Lo, Division Chief of Pediatrics at Banner University Medicine. Doctor, have you seen cases of COVID in children here in southern Arizona?
Yes, we have.
Can you tell us a bit about these cases and how serious they've been?
Yeah, in general, children tend to have mild illness, although unfortunately that's not always the case. They can get quite sick, but typically when children do get COVID and get symptoms from it, they present very much like a typical cold. Fevers, oftentimes some mild runny nose, cough. They may actually, particularly in children, it seems that they may actually present more with GI symptoms, so diarrhea, nausea, a little bit of vomiting. But in general, fortunately, our kids have not been particularly sick when they do get it.
There's this idea that the virus is not affecting children the same as it does adults. Is that true, or is it because children don't have pre-existing conditions yet? Can you help set the record straight?
I think we don't exactly know the full reason why that is, although it does seem to be true that children don't seem to get the disease as frequently as adults can, meaning not that they're going to get it more than once or twice, but that the frequency of which the children get infected seems to be less than adults. I think it's probably multifactorial. The things that you mentioned, the comorbidities, the being having heart disease, having lung disease, being overweight, all of those things, we tend to see less in children. So it's certainly possible that that's contributing to less illness with them. But there's also theories that children are exposed to a lot more viruses, and they may have some cross-reactive protection from some of the other coronaviruses that they've gotten in the past. We don't exactly know why it is yet.
What should a parent do if they suspect their child may have the virus?
I think that the largest treatment for that really is supportive care. If the child who has it is doing well, and they have just a mild fever, a mild cough, the best thing we can really do probably is stay home, keep them isolated away from others to try to minimize spread of the disease to somebody who may not do as well with it. And if your child is getting sicker and you're at all concerned, then certainly visiting your pediatrician or coming to an emergency room or urgent care would be very appropriate.
How do we keep kids safe? I mean, the flu season is underway or will be here very soon, and there are things like proper hygiene and good rest, but I mean, there's got to be more we can be doing as parents.
That's difficult. I think that really the thing that we can do, the number one thing we can do to protect our children is follow the rules that we would follow for ourselves. We can try to avoid groups, we can social distance, we can wear masks, we can wash our hands, wearing eye protection if you're in a setting where you can't necessarily stay back as far. All those things that we would do for ourselves to try to keep ourselves safe are exactly the right thing to do for our children.
As schools begin to reopen their doors to children, are you hopeful that we are taking the right steps as we venture into the unknown?
I think we are. I think that there probably is going to be a right way to do it. And the way that we're proceeding, the way our schools are proceeding in our community, very slow, very cautious, I think is exactly the right way. There are certainly a whole set of other dangers to keeping children out of school. And so getting children back into the school setting is ultimately probably a good thing, but certainly we wouldn't want to take shortcuts and increase the risk. But the slow, cautious approach, watching schools, if there are outbreaks, being able to react to those quickly, I think as long as we're doing those things, that's going to be the right approach.
Okay, Dr. Chandlo from Banner University Medicine, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. To get in touch, visit us on social media or send an email to Arizona360 at azpm.org and let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.